This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 73. And before I dive into today's episode, I'm going to invite you to head on over to my website, NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment, and find out where you are with any perfectionist thinking or behaviors that may be holding you back in your life. Are there some fears that are driving you and under that umbrella of perfectionism or not? This is not a psychological test or assessment or anything like that. But there are definitely some things that I list on the assessment that I'm going to talk a little bit about in the episode. But you've got a way to go over and just kind of see where you are and how you're doing with it. Again, NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment. Now let's dive in. Welcome, sisters. This is part 2 of 3 on my episodes regarding perfectionism, being an HSP. Are they mutually exclusive or not? So in the first series or the first part, I gave you some examples of signs that you may be a perfectionist. And if you went out to episode 72, there was a link for you to go out and you can take a perfectionist assessment. You can also just go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment. And you'll see that quiz is available. This is just to give you some help regarding looking at some of the thoughts and behaviors that you may be doing that, again, are fear-based and causing you to be a perfectionist, and it's impacting your life in a not-so-healthy way. What I wanted to go back to as well, I was re-looking at or re-listening to what I was saying, and I don't think I was very clear regarding perfectionism and being an HSP. So I want to go back and clarify that. So in the first part of perfectionism of the series, I had stated, like Dr. Aaron says, as an HSP, highly sensitive person, we like to do things right the first time, or we like to do things well the first time. So we gather all the information, we really process it, think about it. And that does not equate that you're a perfectionist. Now, I know it's stated in one of her books that that's what that means, and people say, well, I'm a perfectionist. Remember, perfectionism is a fear-based way of thinking. It is thinking that you are not enough, you're not good enough, you're just not enough, you're not lovable, you're not worthy. That's not the core or one of the characteristics of being an HSP, a highly sensitive person. So I wanted to go back and really make that clear. Perfectionism is truly more on, it's based in a fear, the lack of, that you're doing things because you're so worried about what other people will think of you, or that you don't think so highly of yourself, where just because us HSPs make decisions more slowly, it doesn't mean that you're not a healthy striver. So go back to episode 1 when I talked about healthy striving, and hopefully that will be clear to you if I didn't think I was so clear last week. Okay, so in this week, I really want to talk about where some of these beliefs actually come from. So I hinted around a little bit last week, or in the part 1, in episode 72, that some of my perfectionism belief systems came from what I perceived as a little girl of what my parents wanted, whether they articulated it directly or indirectly. Some of my filters confuse it as, in order to get high grades, in order for you to be loved, in order for you to prove yourself to them, you've got to get these high grades, and that's why they're paying you money in high school or whatever. Well, there's also, you can have messages from your school system, you can have messages from parents, from relatives, from your community, from the world, the society that we're in. There's all kinds of mixed messages out there that can really drive this fear-based thinking that somehow there is something wrong with you. In just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the work by Dr. Burns and Dr. Amen regarding cognitive distortions, or ants is what Dr. Amen called them. But before I do, I want you just to get curious. Again, just stay curious when I talk about this. Explore your past growing up. You explore your childhood a little bit and look at some of the messages you may received, again, either directly or indirectly. So were your parents some people that were really high achievers? They were striving because they wanted to look good. They thought if they had the perfect life that they would be liked by other people, and then that message was passed down to you. Were your parents critical of your grades or how you looked or the friends that you kept? Were your parents not even in tune with you? Dr. Jonas Webb, she talks quite a bit about, she's got the term childhood emotional neglect, and I think I'm going to do a separate episode on that. But parents that it ends up being more like the emotional abuse, even though it's not necessarily talked about that way, but parents that were not in tune with you. They just didn't meet your emotional needs. They minimized your emotional needs. They dismissed your emotional needs. You can then get into this thinking, this fear-based thinking, because the messages you received were more of like, wow, I've got to really prove myself so that I can be loved. And you may have actually gotten that. So like you got good grades, or you won an event in a sport, or you received a trophy for spelling bees, whatever it is. And that got really rewarded. But if you weren't doing things that your parents accepted, relatives accepted, teachers accepted, whatever, you got dismissed, put down. Those messages then become about those achievements. And that's the only way that you received love or recognition for who you were. That goes deep into the psyche, goes into the subconscious of this message that in order for me to be loved, I really need to perform. I've got to be perfect at everything that I'm doing. Otherwise, nobody's going to love me or like me, and then that means I'm an unlovable person. It becomes a very distorted, internalized message, and you start to see the world through those filters. And that's where your inner critic just loves to thrive, is on those messages. Another way you may have received those mixed messages is, let's say your parents were also high achievers, or they are very critical of themselves, and so they were critical of you. All of that goes back to really distorting of who you should or should not be in this world. And it's based upon performance, it's based upon your looks, it's based upon external things versus what internally is going on. Your beauty that comes from within, the gentleness that is there, the intelligence that is there, that is within you. You might have also grown up in a family where there was mental health issues, like severe mental health issues, and the caregivers, parents, they didn't get treatment for it, or there was addiction issues, there were abuse issues going on, meaning you grew up in an abusive family. That is absolutely going to impact your belief system, what gets programmed into your subconscious as well. So let me dive into a little bit regarding Dr. Burns and Dr. Amen. So I've talked about their work in a couple different episodes, and one in my previous podcast and one I've been on other people's podcast. Dr. David Burns, he named it cognitive distorted thinking. Dr. Burns had 10 different cognitive distortions. There's the all or nothing, overgeneralizing, there's a mental filter, disqualifying the positive, mind reading, magnification or minimization, emotional reasoning. We've talked before about the shoulds statements, labeling, personalization, and then blaming. Then Dr. Daniel Amen, he had what he called ANTs, automatic negative thoughts, and he created 9 of them. So they were very similar to Dr. Burns. And he also called fortune telling, guilt beating, including shoulds, must, ought tos, have tos. What I find most often when it comes to women that I've worked with, and even teen girls that I've worked with, when those cognitive distortions, what I call unhealthy thinking patterns, when they come up, there's a lot of all or nothing, very black and white thinking. I will never get a date. This will always happen to me. Typically, there's a lot of personalization that goes on. That means you take everything personally, or you assign blame to yourself for no logical reason. You believe that you're to blame. So, example, you're assuming that a friend is mad at you, or they didn't have fun during an evening that you spent time together. You don't have any facts that back that up, but you just assume that. The other main thing that I see with the unhealthy thinking are, again, the should statements. You make it about yourself, what you should do, what you ought to do, what you must do. And you can also apply that to others, and you're imposing a set of expectations that they'll not likely meet. So going back to that assessment that I created, some signs that you're a perfectionist, that meets that. And what I mean by that, right, is you can be really critical with yourself, you're critical of others, you're putting expectations on other people that they don't even know you're putting on them. And so they're going to disappoint you because they're not going to be able to live up to what you think they should do or not do, type of thing. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm now recognizing, because I stayed in that curious mindset, meaning observing my thoughts, observing my behaviors, and you're like, I do that. I don't want you to freak out. The whole point of this series is I want women to gain more insight of what's driving their life, and it's fear. It's the worry, it's not being enough, and how these learned thought patterns, these learned behaviors can be totally unlearned. So the whole point of this part is being able to recognize what are these thoughts, where did these beliefs come from, so that you can begin to turn them around. So put another way, an HSP is in a disempowered state when their fear is running them. And that goes for anybody, HSP or non-HSP. But when perfectionism is running you, that means you're typically overwhelmed. You're also overfunctioning, meaning you're taking responsibility for things that are not yours to take responsibility for. Meaning, oh, I'm responsible for how that person feels. I'm responsible for everybody's behaviors. I've got to just do everything perfectly because nothing is in control in this world and I'm out of control. It's that external locus of control based thinking versus internal locus of control based thinking. And I talk about the extrinsic versus intrinsic based way of thinking in episode 45, where I talk about the emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. If you are blaming yourself more often than not, or you're blaming others, you're in that disempowered state. Fear is still running you. The whole point of this is getting clear of what do you repeatedly tell yourself in your mind. That's where that inner critic, man, that part can come out, and it can be loud, it can be vicious. And when you start to recognize that, it's like, okay, that is not me. That's not all of me. That may be messages that you truly did receive growing up, something very direct. Or it may, again, be a message that was an indirect message, like, oh, I have to get high grades in order to be loved. Not true. Your true value, your self-worth has nothing to do with your salary that you make now, the income that you bring in, whether you have children, you don't have children, whether you are tall or short. None of that has to do with your self-worth. It's what you believe in you, and that you are truly whole, and that you truly are lovable. As humans, right, we want that connection. And I was referencing a little bit of Brene Brown last time in the episode. I don't know if I directly stated that or not, but she talks so much about embracing the imperfections because we're all imperfect human beings. But that healthy striving is, I'm going after this thing over here because I want to improve myself. That's about personal development. If you're going after a job promotion and you're not doing it because, oh, I want my partner to think better of me, or I want my boss to think better of me, or I want my friends to think better of me, because if I just have this title, which has this salary amount, then that means I've made it in the world. That's an external focused goal. That's about trying to please other people. So that's the other kind of, I call it the warning sign of perfectionism. It can easily lead into people-pleasing behavior, where you're doing everything for everybody else, which means you're going to definitely be overwhelmed. You're going to be exhausted. Resentment's going to grow because you're not listening to your own inner truth. You don't value yourself And so no one else can do that either. You get mirrored back what you're putting out there in the world. And I know that's really hard for a lot of people to recognize that, but that is part of it. If you are putting out there that you're not enough, you generate that back to you. Meaning you will, more likely than not, you have people in your life that help reinforce that belief system that you're not enough. You've got a big dream you want to go after and they're like, oh no, you can't do that, or you're not going to be able to do that. So you get that feedback from them, which reinforces the belief that you're truly not enough and you're not capable of going after that big old dream that you've got going on. It's time to change the thinking. When you go after that job promotion, and it's more like because I want to challenge myself to supervise people, to be able to mentor people, because I want to give back in a bigger way, that's personal growth. That's healthy striving. It's not about, and then you let go of the outcome if you get it or you don't get it. It's like, I'm going to put my name in the hat and see what happens. That's good, healthy striving because you're role modeling to yourself. It's like, yeah, I know I'm qualified to do this and I just really want to challenge myself and it's okay, no matter what anybody else thinks of me. You also, from an empowered standpoint, from an empowered, HSP, you've got really good boundaries set up then. You're able to say no. You're able to feel connected and calm in certain situations where your safety really isn't at risk. It's more just like, yeah, I can come from this calm place of saying, no, thank you so much for the invite. And I've got other things going on, or not this time, maybe another time. And that's all okay. You're not blaming yourself for everything else. You're not on the track of burnout because you're not setting up boundaries. You're not wondering what this other person is thinking or saying, or you're creating stories in your mind from a place of fear because you're assuming what they're thinking. You ask. When you're coming from an empowered place, you're asking the other person, like, hey, I didn't quite understand what you meant by this. Could you clarify that for me? Or what I heard you say was X, Y, and Z. Did I hear that correctly? That's just part of getting clarification. It's not creating these inner stories that are false. The wonderful thing about all of this, once you start to recognize those thought patterns, you, as I said, you can change that. And so much of that begins with the self-compassion. It's self-compassion for you. It's forgiving the people that helped create those things. It's not about blaming them anymore. It's like, you know what? As an adult, I now have a choice. I can keep blaming the people and the situations that I grew up with. Accept it. That is the past. Forgive them. It doesn't mean I forget. And I'm moving on because I'm not letting that stuff run me anymore. I'm not allowing this fear-based thinking to run me, to make the decisions in my life. When fear's driving it, it's, messing things up. It's creating all these inner stories, like I've said many times before, that are just lies. They're illusions. They're exaggerations. They don't serve you with the higher good. It keeps you really playing small. That's the thing about perfectionism. Like I said in episode 72, you will play small. It's like you're so afraid to get yourself out there. Maybe you're a small business owner and you're afraid to raise your rates. You're afraid to change your hours because, people won't pay for that or people won't show up. Well, you don't know that. I work with healers, and what I often see is they undercharge, and so they are barely scraping by. They're truly not meeting their business needs or their personal financial needs. Well, you're not going to have a business. Come 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you won't have a business. If you aren't financially viable, you don't have a business. But when fear is running the show, when that inner critic is saying you're not worth it or you can't do this or it's wrong of you to actually make a profit, you're not going to be able to serve the way you want to serve because fear's running it. It's about creating the both and situation in your mind, how you're thinking, so that you grow your confidence level as well, and you can continue to serve the world in a bigger way to make the difference that you're wanting to make, the reason why you're on this planet. So it's taking calculated risk. When that inner critic comes up and says, well, you're not worthy of this, you can't do that, that's not from you. That's coming from a very ego-based, fear-centered place. It's a subconscious, message you received when you were little, and you've been playing that over and over and over. Unless that inner critic can turn into a lovely inner coach, you can thank it for wanting to keep you safe and let it know it's okay, you've got this. You're no longer this child. You're an adult who is intelligent and can make good decisions. Go back to episode 17 and re-listen to the limiting beliefs episode that I did. And I share about where those limiting beliefs come from. Again, very much like what Dr. Burns and Dr. Ammons are talking about regarding those cognitive distortions, that's where those beliefs are coming from. And they're really cemented into your mind, a subconscious, well before the age of 9. You're an adult now. Now that you have this awareness, you can go in and change that. And it's really priming your subconscious with a different message. Because we're so funny as human beings. We will replay the majority of our old thoughts. They go on every single day. So unless you bring awareness to that, you're just feeding yourself fear. And that's where the stress is coming from. That's where the overwhelm is coming from. That's where the anxiety is coming from. And you can do it differently. You have the ability to change that. Another episode I would encourage you to listen to if you have not is episode 47, where I talk about rewriting your inner story. You be the heroine of your own story. It's your life. You're 100% responsible for it. And as an adult, you're not under anybody else's thumb anymore. It's like, own it. It's okay to say, yeah, I don't need to look perfectly, have the perfect house, have the perfect kids, have the perfect life. Because one, that doesn't even exist. But two, it's like I'm becoming grateful for where I am right now in this moment. Maybe you're in a hard spot, you're struggling with something, but knowing it's time limited, it's not a forever. But when your mind is so focused on what isn't working, you're going to create more of that in your life. If it's, I've got to control everybody else because then things will change for me, then it's an illusion. That is not the truth. That's coming from a place of everything needs to be perfect in order for life to be okay. And that's not going to help you. It's going to keep you stuck. So the next episode, in part 3 of this series, I'm going to talk about how perfectionism can show up in various aspects of your life. I'm going to give you some really concrete examples of what that looks like. So for today, I'm hoping, and I want to encourage you to get curious about some of the messages you heard growing up. Go look at that assessment. And again, I'll have the link in the show notes too, where you can go out and get the assessment. Look at the assessment. Am I critical of others? Am I highly critical of myself? Am I playing small? Do I fear failure? Maybe you fear success. Do I need to have everything written down all the time, otherwise it's out of control? Do I struggle with being spontaneous? Do I work long, long hours and I don't allow myself to have any fun? Do I have trouble sleeping? All of those things are pretty much indicators you got some perfectionism going on, and knowing that's not the whole story, and it is possible to change that. But it's being a very disempowered HSP then when perfectionism is driving it, because overwhelm's going to be right alongside that. You've got a high inner critic typically that's yelling in your ear, and it's going to keep reinforcing the belief that you're not enough or that you're not lovable. And it's just a bunch of BS. It's so not true. So as you gain awareness, I want you then to switch the thinking from unhealthy thinking, unhelpful thinking, to what would be a more helpful thought process. Oh, sometimes I mess things up, and what do I learn from it? Oh, I learned X, and now I can move on. Sometimes things in my life, they don't go the way I'd wanted them to go, and that's okay. I move on. Another thought can be sometimes people will feel frustrated or disappointed with a new boundary that I set with them, and that's okay. They get to feel whatever they feel because I'm taking care of me, and I'm also really feeding the relationship if I want to stay in this relationship with this person or if they do. Giving yourself permission to be fully you, not being that good girl thinking she's got to live up to other people's expectations. A while back, I think it was last year, I had given a talk a presentation in someone else's group, and then I had done like a webinar. I think it's still out there somewhere. I'd have to find the link. The good girl meets the spiritually awakened woman. And I got a lot of feedback from people from that workshop. I had a quiz at the end of it, and people filled it out. And some of the feedback I got with what the good girl does that keeps them stuck. And to me, the good girl is a lot of perfectionism. Again, there's that fear of what other people will think and how you need to behave and all of that. It's wrapped up in those two things, really get wrapped up into that. And so some of the feedback I receive from people is this. So the question that I ask him is, what is your biggest challenge when you hide behind the good girl mask? So let's just say when you hide behind perfectionism. Some of the responses that I received was getting my real self across, or not really getting what I need. So not being able to, or thinking you're unable to express yourself assertively, to be able to ask for what you want, to set those boundaries like we've been talking about. Not being able to speak my mind, not being myself, feeling guilty, being taken seriously, being taken advantage of. I tend to get anxious. Being true to my own self and my own needs, just being myself. One person had said that it was just exhausting. It was really tiring. Another person actually named it trying to be perfect. When you do not give yourself the permission to be you, to take your power, meaning your self-power. It's not power over anybody. It's being empowered. Let me phrase it that way. Being empowered. It's okay to have healthy boundaries. It's okay to say no. It's okay to assert yourself. Love those sensitivities that are part of who you are. They are so not a weakness. They are your strength. They're your superpowers. When you come from that empowered place, it changes your relationships. It changes how people see you and view you. And again, you're not put on this planet to be liked by people, not by everybody. You're put on this planet because you have a mission, whatever that is. You've got a purpose to be here. So I hope today you're gaining some insight of how those fearful thoughts, those unhealthy thoughts, distorted thoughts, where they came from, and if you can name where they came from, that's not the point, but just recognizing what are some of those unhelpful thoughts that are keeping you stuck and being a perfectionist, so that you can come over to the other side of being the recovered perfectionist, meaning, yes, you recognize those thoughts maybe because you get triggered by something, but you no longer stay in that playing small place. You don't stay stuck in that fearful place anymore, because you're more grounded in who you are, and it's okay, knowing that you, again, are worthy and that you are whole, that you are totally enough. When you're a perfectionist, when she wants to come out to play, you recognize her, you send her a big old hug and a lot of love and say, I've got this. Because as an adult woman, I'm the one who's making decisions for my life. Yes, it impacts other people and those around me, yet I'm making those choices. Yes, there's consequences for those choices, but it's no longer saying I'm trying to control other people or I'm thinking things are out of control. They are what they are. I continue to come back to the present moment because that's all there is. So, like I said, next week, I want to talk more about I'll give you some real, again, concrete examples of how perfectionism impacts your relationships, your career, your fun and leisure area, those kind of the wheel of life stuff, how that impacts that. Go out again to the show notes to get the perfectionist assessment, see where you are so that you can begin to break free from this. Until next time, thank you for listening. Curious about where you stand in perfectionism? Head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment. Take that short little assessment that I've created just for you and see how you do. No right or wrong, just an assessment. Take care.